A girl cuts off her own toes to fit into a shoe. Her sister slices off her heel. And two pigeons sing to a prince, "There is blood in the shoe. There is blood in the shoe." That is not a horror movie. That is Cinderella, the real one. The one the brothers Grimm published in 1812. And it gets worse. Much worse, because the Grimm version, that's only the middle layer. Below it sits a French tale from 1697, where things are softer but stranger. And below that, the oldest version of all, from 1634, where Cinderella herself commits murder. I've told 100 tales from this stage. This one still keeps me awake. So let me tell you what really happened. All three versions, layer by layer, from the fairy dust on top to the bones at the bottom. Now, before we dig into the darkness, let's start with what you think you know. The Disney version, 1950. A sweet girl in rags, a cruel stepmother, two clumsy stepsisters, a fairy godmother who turns a pumpkin into a coach and mice into horses. There's a ball, a glass slipper, a midnight deadline, and a prince who somehow can't remember what the girl's face looks like, but can identify her by shoe size. I've always loved that detail. He danced with her for hours, but apparently never looked up from her feet. Anyway, the slipper fits. The prince finds her. The stepsisters are embarrassed, but otherwise fine. Everyone lives happily ever after. No blood, no birds, no consequences. It's a beautiful story. It really is, and I say that without irony. Disney took something ancient and terrifying and turned it into 90 minutes of pure warmth. But the original is something else entirely. Let's start with the brothers Grimm. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, Germany, 1812. Their version is called Aschenputtel, literally, the one who sits in the ashes. It begins with a death. Cinderella's mother is dying. She calls her daughter to her bedside and tells her, "Dear child, be good and pious, and God will always take care of you, and I will look down from heaven and be near you." Then she dies. The father, after some time, remarries, a woman with two daughters of her own, and they are not the bumbling comic relief you know from Disney. They are beautiful, fair of face, but vile and dark of heart, Grimm's exact words. They strip Cinderella of her fine clothes. They give her a gray smock, wooden shoes. They make her sleep by the hearth, in the cinders and ashes. That's where the name comes from, not a nickname she chose, a name they gave her to humiliate her. Now here's where it diverges from Disney immediately. There is no fairy godmother. None. Instead, the father goes on a journey and asks his three daughters what gifts they'd like. The stepsisters ask for beautiful dresses, pearls, and jewels. Cinderella asks for the first twig that brushes against his hat on the way home. He brings her a hazel twig. She plants it on her mother's grave, and she weeps so much that her tears water it, and it grows into a great tree. Cinderella goes to that tree 3 times a day. She sits beneath it, she weeps, she prays, and a little white bird comes to sit on the branches. Whatever she wishes for, the bird throws it down to her. That white bird, remember it, it's not a decoration. It's the soul of her dead mother, watching over her from the branches of a grave tree. That is the fairy godmother, a ghost bound to a hazel tree growing from a grave. The king announces a festival, 3 days of feasting, so his son can choose a bride. The stepsisters primp and preen and go. Cinderella begs to attend. The stepmother says, You have no dress, no shoes, you don't even know how to dance. You want to go to the festival? And then she dumps a bowl of lentils into the ashes. Pick these out in 2 hours, she says, and you may go. Cinderella calls the birds, turtle doves, pigeons, every bird beneath the sky. They pick out the lentils in 1 hour, but the stepmother says no anyway. Dumps 2 bowls, same thing. The birds pick them clean. The stepmother still says no. So Cinderella goes to her mother's grave. She says to the tree, Shiver and quiver, little tree. Silver and gold throw over me. And the bird throws down a dress of gold and silver and slippers embroidered with silk. Not glass slippers, that's Perrault. We'll get to him. In Grimm, they're gold. She goes to the festival. She's so beautiful that no one recognizes her, not even her stepsisters. The prince dances only with her. When anyone else approaches, he says, She is my partner. At the end of the night, she runs. The prince follows. She escapes by hiding in a pigeon house. The prince tells her father, The unknown maiden has jumped into the pigeon house. The father thinks, Could it be Cinderella? They chop the pigeon house open. No one inside. Cinderella is already back in her gray smock, lying in the ashes. Second night, same thing. Even more beautiful dress. She flees, climbs a pear tree. They chop it down. She's gone. Third night, the dress is even more magnificent. But this time, the prince has smeared the staircase with pitch, tar. When she runs, her left slipper sticks to the step. A golden slipper, small and delicate and beautiful. And the prince says, No one else shall be my wife but the one whose foot fits this golden slipper. Here's where Disney ends. Here's where Grimm begins. The prince comes to the house. The eldest stepsister takes the slipper to her room. She tries it on. Her big toe won't fit. Her mother hands her a knife and says, Cut off your toe. When you are queen, you won't need to walk anymore. The girl cuts off her own toe. She forces her foot into the slipper. She swallows the pain. She goes out to the prince, and he takes her on his horse as his bride. But they have to ride past the mother's grave, and 2 pigeons are sitting on the hazel tree, and they sing, Rook-de-goo, rook-de-goo, there is blood in the shoe. The shoe is too tight. This bride is not right. The prince looks down. The white stocking is soaked red. He turns the horse around. The second sister takes the slipper. Her heel is too big. The mother hands her the knife. Cut off a piece of your heel. When you are queen, you won't need to walk anymore. Same sentence, same knife, same logic. The girl cuts off part of her heel, jams her foot into the slipper, goes out to the prince. He puts her on his horse. They ride past the grave. And the pigeons sing again. Rook-de-goo, rook-de-goo. There is blood in the shoe. The shoe is too tight. This bride is not right. Blood dripping from the slipper. The prince turns around a second time. And then Cinderella tries the slipper. It fits perfectly. No blade needed. The prince looks into her face and recognizes the beautiful maiden who danced with him. "This is the right bride," he says. Now, you might think that's the end. The dark part is over. The good part begins. It's not over. The wedding day arrives. The two stepsisters come. They want to share in Cinderella's good fortune. They walk beside her on the way to the church, one on each side. And the pigeons come down. They peck out one eye from each sister, the right eye from one, the left eye from the other. On the way out of the church, the pigeons come again. They take the remaining eyes. Both sisters, blinded permanently. Grimm writes this plainly. No metaphor, no symbol. The pigeons, the spirit of the dead mother, pecked out their eyes for their wickedness and falsehood, and they were punished with blindness for the rest of their days. 300 years of parents telling this as a bedtime story. And then the birds took their eyes, dear. Now, go to sleep. You know, as you do. Now, I should tell you something important. That eye-pecking scene, it wasn't in the first edition. The brothers Grimm published their first collection in 1812. 7 editions followed, the last one in 1857. And with every edition, they changed things, but not always in the direction you'd expect. The eye-pecking was added in the second edition, 1819. They made it more violent, not less. They also added the scenes where Cinderella hides in the pigeon house and the pear tree. The original 1812 version was simpler, just 2 pigeons helping with lentils. By 1819, it's a whole flock of birds, an elaborate chase, and permanent mutilation at the wedding. But in other stories, the Grimms went the opposite direction, softening, sanitizing, and we'll talk about that in a moment, because it's a pattern that explains everything. First, let's go deeper. 60 years before the Grimms, 1697, France. Charles Perrault publishes a collection called Histoires ou Contes du Temps Passé, Stories or Tales of Times Past, and inside it, a story called Cendrillon ou La Petite Pantoufle de Verre. Cinderella, or the Little Glass Slipper. This is where it comes from. The glass slipper, not Grimm, not an ancient tradition. Perrault, 1697, he invented it. Earlier versions of the tale had golden slippers, or fur slippers, or in one Chinese version from the 9th century, gold shoes. Perrault made them glass. Fragile, transparent, magical. And it changed everything, because a glass slipper can't be altered, can't be stretched, can't be faked. It either fits or it doesn't. It's not just a shoe, it's a truth test. Perrault also invented the fairy godmother. No ghost on a grave tree, no white bird. A proper fairy with a wand, who shows up in person and turns a pumpkin into a gilded coach, mice into horses, a rat into a coachman, and lizards into footmen. This is the version Disney adapted, almost scene for scene. But here's the thing about Perrault that most people don't know. His ending is completely different from Grimm. The stepsisters don't cut off their toes. They don't lose their eyes. They don't get punished at all. When Cinderella is revealed as the mystery princess, the 2 stepsisters throw themselves at her feet. They beg forgiveness. And Cinderella, who is as good as she is beautiful, Perrault says, forgives them with all her heart. She gives them a home in the palace. And that very same day, she has them married to 2 great lords of the court. No blood, No pigeons, no blindness, just grace. And then Perrault does something strange. He adds a moral at the end. Actually, two morals. The first says, beauty is a treasure, but graciousness is priceless. Without it, nothing is possible. With it, one can do anything. The second moral contradicts the first. It says, essentially, that none of this matters without the right connections. You can have all the virtue in the world, but without a fairy godmother, without someone powerful in your corner, you'll never make it. Perrault, writing in the court of Louis XIV, dropping that little truth bomb at the end of a fairy tale. Be kind, be good, but also know someone important. It's remarkably cynical for a children's story, and remarkably honest. So Perrault is softer than Grimm, more polished, more courtly, but still darker than Disney, because at least Perrault acknowledges the world is rigged. Disney doesn't even go that far. In Disney, the world is fair if you just believe hard enough. But we're not at the bottom yet. There's one more layer, and this one changes everything. 1634. Naples. A man named Giambattista Basile publishes a collection of fairy tales called Lo Conto degli Conti, the Tale of Tales, also known as Il Pentamerone, because it's structured like Boccaccio's Decameron, but with 50 tales told over 5 days. This is the oldest written version of Cinderella in Europe, 60 years before Perrault, nearly 200 years before Grimm, and it is nothing like what you expect. The heroine's name is Zezola. Her nickname is La Gatta Cenerentola, the cat Cinderella, because she wanders alone and wild, with her face dirty from ash, like a stray cat by the hearth. Her father is a prince, her mother is dead, her father has remarried, and Zezola hates her stepmother. Standard so far. But Zezola has a governess, a woman she trusts, a woman she confides in about how terrible the stepmother is. And one day, the governess says something. She says, "If you do as I tell you, I will become your new mother, and I will love you dearly." She tells Zezola to ask her stepmother to fetch an old dress from a heavy trunk in the attic, and when the stepmother kneels over the trunk and reaches inside, Zezola drops the lid on her neck. It breaks. The stepmother is dead. Zezola killed her. Not accidentally, not in self-defense. The governess planned it. Zezola executed it. A premeditated murder disguised as an accident, committed by the heroine of the story. And it works. After the mourning period, Zezola convinces her father to marry the governess, just as planned, a new mother, one who loves her. Except the governess has been hiding something. She has 6 daughters of her own, and once she's married to the prince, once she has power, she does exactly what the first stepmother did. She pushes Zezola aside. Her own 6 daughters take priority. Zezola is sent back to the ashes, back to the hearth, back to being a cat by the fire. Wait, she murdered her first stepmother on the instructions of the woman who became her second stepmother, who turned out to be just as bad. And we made this into a Disney princess story. The magic in Basile's version comes from a different place too. No fairy godmother, no grave tree. Zezola's father travels to the island of Sardinia. and she asks him to recommend her to the dove of the fairies. He does, and a fairy gives him gifts for Zezola: a golden date pit, a golden hoe, a golden bucket, and a silk cloth. Zezola plants the date pit. She tends it with the golden tools, and within 4 days the tree grows to the height of a woman, and a fairy emerges from it and says, "What do you wish for?" The fairy teaches Zezola a spell. When she recites it at the tree, she transforms. She becomes a queen, mounted on a fine horse, surrounded by 12 pages. She rides to the festival. The king sees her. He is immediately obsessed. She goes 3 times, each time more dazzling. On the 3rd visit, she loses a shoe. Not a glass slipper, not a golden slipper, a patten, a wooden overshoe, the kind women wore in 17th century Italy to keep their feet out of the mud. Cloch. The king of Naples goes mad searching for the owner of a wooden clog. He holds a feast for every woman in the kingdom to try on the shoe. And when Zezola's foot slides in, the king takes her in his arms and sets the crown upon her head. Let me say that again. The woman who murdered her first stepmother, who manipulated her father into marrying her governess, who watched it all go wrong when the governess betrayed her, she becomes queen. That's Cinderella, the original Cinderella, not a passive girl who waits for rescue. A survivor, a schemer, a girl who made a terrible bargain, paid the price, and clawed her way to the throne anyway. I need a moment. This one's rough. Now let's talk about what happened to these stories over 400 years, because the journey from Basile to your television screen is a story in itself. Basile wrote for adults. Lo Conto degli Conti was meant for the Neapolitan court. Bawdy, violent, darkly funny. No one was reading it to children. Zezola is a murderer because the world Basile described was full of murderers. Power meant survival. Morality was a luxury. Perrault, 60 years later, was writing for the French aristocracy. His tales were elegant, witty, designed to be read aloud in salons. He stripped out the murder. He added the fairy godmother and the glass slipper because they were pretty and clever and would make the ladies of Versailles smile. He kept a sharp edge in his morals, that quiet cynicism, but the blood was gone. Then come the Grimms. And the Grimms are fascinating because they went in both directions at once. Their first edition in 1812 was closer to the raw, oral tradition. Rough, violent, unsentimental. But with each new edition, they reshaped the tales. Not just Cinderella. All of them. They had a pattern. First, biological mothers became stepmothers. In the original 1812 Hansel and Gretel, it's the children's own mother who convinces the father to abandon them in the forest. By later editions, she's been replaced with a stepmother because the Grimms couldn't stomach the idea of a real mother doing that. Same pattern across dozens of tales. The source of cruelty had to come from outside the family. A stepmother, a witch, never the actual mother. Second, they added Christian morality. Good must be rewarded, evil must be punished, cleanly, visibly, which is why they added the eye-pecking in Cinderella's 2nd edition. The Stepsisters had to pay, not because the oral tradition demanded it, but because the Grimm's increasingly religious worldview did. Third, They softened sexual content. Rapunzel's pregnancy was written out. Suggestive episodes were trimmed or removed. The tales had to be suitable for children because the Grimms had discovered their audience. The first edition sold modestly, but once they started marketing to families, sales exploded. By the seventh and final edition in 1857, the tales were polished, moralized, and domesticated. They were still dark, yes. The eye-pecking remained, but the moral framework was now crystal clear. Suffer with grace, be pure of heart, and let God handle the vengeance. Then came the Victorians, and if the Grimms sanitized the stories a little, the Victorian era sanitized them a lot. Victorian England demanded moral clarity. Good girls must be purely good, passive, long-suffering. Evil must be grotesque but also distant, safely contained in a wicked stepmother or an ugly witch. No ambiguity, no complicity, and certainly no heroines who commit murder. The toe-cutting stayed in some retellings but was treated as proof of the stepsisters' vanity, not as a desperate act. The eye-pecking became divine justice, not the revenge of a dead mother's ghost. The whole thing was reframed. And then, 1950, Walt Disney. The final layer of sanitization. Disney took Perrault's version, which was already the softest, and made it softer still. He removed Perrault's cynical moral. He removed any hint that the world might be unfair regardless of your goodness. He made Cinderella purely passive, a girl who endures, who sings to animals, who never fights back, who is saved entirely by external magic and the correct shoe size. And look, it worked. It's a masterpiece of animation. It made people cry in 1950, and it makes people cry today. But something was lost. Let me tell you what was lost. These stories were not entertainment, not originally. They were warnings, survival guides dressed up as fairy tales and passed from mouth to mouth in a world where most people couldn't read. The toe cutting. Think about what it actually represents. A mother telling her daughter to mutilate herself to marry a prince, to destroy her own body for a chance at upward mobility. That's not a fairy tale exaggeration. That was reality. For centuries, marriage was the only path out of poverty for women, the only path to safety, to food, to a roof. And families did monstrous things to make it happen. They starved their daughters to keep them thin. They bound their feet, in some cultures literally. They broke their ribs with corsets. They pulled their teeth to make room for fashionable dentures. Cut off your toe. When you are queen, you won't need to walk anymore. That line isn't fantasy. It's a compressed truth about what desperation does to people. The eye-pecking. Blinding was a real punishment in medieval Europe, used for thieves, traitors, political enemies. William the Conqueror replaced the death penalty with blinding and castration when he took England in 1066. In the Byzantine Empire, rebels were blinded to remove them from power without creating martyrs. When Grimm's pigeons peck out the stepsisters' eyes at the wedding, that's not random cruelty. It's a specific cultural reference. Public disfigurement as the mark of disgrace. Permanent. Visible. You can't hide blinded eyes. Everyone who sees you knows what you did. The pigeons are not just birds. They're the justice system of a world where courts belong to kings, and the only justice common people could imagine was divine, swift, brutal, symmetrical. And Zezola, the murder. Basile wasn't writing a cautionary tale about violence. He was describing agency. Zezola lives in a world with no safety net, no child protection, no divorce, no inheritance rights for daughters. Her stepmother is cruel. Her father is indifferent. The governess offers a way out. A terrible way. A way that requires killing someone. And Zezola takes it. Because in the world Basile knew, the world of 17th century Naples, survival meant making impossible choices. You could be passive and be ground to dust, or you could act, even if acting meant blood on your hands. What Disney removed wasn't just the violence, it was the agency. The original Cinderellas are not passive. Zezola is a killer. Grimm's Aschenputtel calls on the spirit of her dead mother and commands birds like an army. Even Perrault Cinderella has the wit to exploit every advantage and the grace to turn her enemies into allies at the end. The Disney Cinderella waits. She suffers, she sings, and she is rescued by a combination of magic, mice, and footwear. The originals don't wait to be rescued. They rescue themselves by any means necessary. And there's something else. Something that gets lost when you clean up these stories. The darkness in them isn't gratuitous. It serves a purpose. When a mother tells her daughter to cut off her toe, the story is saying, look at what this world does to people. Look at how far they'll go. This is wrong. Recognize it. When Zezola kills her stepmother and gets a worse one in return, the story is saying, violence doesn't solve the problem. It just changes the shape of the cage. When the pigeons blind the stepsisters at the wedding, the story is saying, justice exists, even when it's ugly, even when it's not the kind you'd choose. These aren't random horrors bolted onto a princess story. They're the point. The darkness is the lesson, and when you remove it, you're left with a story that says nothing except be nice and wait for a prince. There's one more thing I want you to know. The oldest known Cinderella story is not European. It's from China, 9th century. A girl named Ye Xian, written down by a man named Duan Chengxi around 850 AD. She has a magical fish instead of a fairy godmother. She loses a golden shoe at a festival. A king finds it and searches for the owner. And there are even older traces. A Greek story from the 1st century about a slave girl named Rhodopis, whose sandal is stolen by an eagle and dropped into the lap of the pharaoh, who then searches for her across Egypt. This story is everywhere, every culture, every continent, for thousands of years. A mistreated girl, a transformation, a lost shoe, a powerful man who searches. Why? Because every culture has had daughters who were treated as property. Every culture has had mothers who did terrible things to secure their children's futures. Every culture has known the desperation of being trapped at the bottom with no way up except by someone else's mercy or your own ruthlessness. Cinderella isn't one story. It's the story, the universal one. And the reason it keeps being told and retold and sanitized and retold again is because we keep needing to hear it. We just keep disagreeing about how much truth we can handle. So there it is. 3 versions, 4 centuries, 1 story. A girl named Zezola who crushed her stepmother's neck with a trunk lid in 1634 Naples. A girl named Cinderella who forgave her tormentors and married them off to lords in 1697 Paris. A girl named Aschenputtel whose dead mother's ghost sent pigeons to blind her enemies at her wedding in 1812 Germany. And a girl named Cinderella who sang to mice and lost a glass slipper in 1950 Hollywood. Same girl, same story, told and retold, until the blood was washed away and the bones were buried, and all that was left was the dress and the shoe and the happily ever after. I've been telling stories on this stage for years, and people always ask me, why do the old versions have to be so dark? Why can't it just be the nice version? And I always say the same thing. The nice version is a lullaby. It helps you sleep. The dark version is an alarm. It wakes you up. And some mornings you need the alarm. Remember what those pigeons sang. There is blood in the shoe. There always was. We just learned to stop looking down.